Hey, so welcome back. I left this out of our last video presentation. It's the question, what about potassium losses in sweat? So yes, you will lose some potassium in your sweat, but not very much as opposed to sodium. The average athlete might only lose about 180 milligrams of potassium in a 2-hour workout. A banana is going to give you about 480 some milligrams of potassium, easily replacing those losses. And I want to point out that it's a myth that low potassium levels are the main cause of muscle cramping, right? It is not, all right? There's no real good research to support that at all. So eating a banana isn't going to cure a muscle cramp. Now, that being said, potassium is an important electrolyte. Most Americans don't get enough, including athletes. So I'm going to mention coconut water to you because for a while it was something that was very popular among people or athletes to try and hydrate during exercise with coconut water. But if we look at the composition of many coconut waters, they tend to be low in sodium and high in potassium, which is great for all around nutrition, but maybe not exactly what you need when you're doing long duration exercise. So if you like coconut water, I mean, awesome, add it to a smoothie. It's going to make your potassium content higher, and that's wonderful, right? Now, there is a brand that does have a little bit more sodium in it. That's Psycho brand, and that's why I have it there. So you might want to try it and see how it works for you. So let's talk about tips for hydrating. All right. So athletes need to focus on consuming fluids at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks all day long. As I mentioned earlier, carry a water bottle with you. Weigh yourself before and after exercise to know your sweat rate. And we're going to talk a little bit in just a minute about tracking your hydration by looking at the color of your urine. All right, so let's talk about before exercise. So typically what's recommended is 16 to 20 ounces of water or a sports drink at least 4 hours before exercise, and then drinking maybe another 1 to 1.5 cups 10 to 15 minutes before you go. And then during exercise, it's about 3 to 8 ounces of water for exercise under 60 minutes. Okay. That translates into 2 to 3 very large gulps. I always told my athletes 6 gulps, but I wasn't thinking very large gulps, just typical swallows. But here, I figured the 2 to 3 large gulps equals probably just 6 ordinary swallows. And then if you're exercising for longer than 60 minutes, it's 3 to 8 ounces of a sports beverage. So something like the sports drinks that we mentioned earlier, like the Gatorade or the Powerade, whatever it is you like. Okay, after exercise, so important to rehydrate. So again, if you're doing that pre and post weigh-ins, okay, drink 16 to 24 ounces for every pound that you've lost within 2 hours of activity, especially if you have double workouts during the day. All right, so then next up, we're just going to talk a little bit about how to monitor the color of your urine, okay? So this is what I call the P chart. And if your urine doesn't have to be clear to be hydrated, that's an old saying. Actually, it just needs to be the color of lemonade. So if you're urinating throughout the day, your urine should look like 1, 2, or 3 here, okay? Urine above like 4 or above indicates dehydration. So I always tell my athletes if it's the color of apple juice, you're dehydrated. All right, so this is a big deal in most like Division I schools and professional athletes. They've got these charts posted everywhere, especially in the bathrooms or the restrooms for athletes to remind them to check their urine. Okay. And you should also think about how often you go. So athletes should urinate often, every couple of hours. You know, if it's you got up and urinated at 7 a.m. and it's now 1 o'clock and you haven't urinated, you're dehydrated. Okay. So you should go every few hours and ample amounts as well. And then just a reminder, if you're feeling fatigued or if you know you're a heavy sweater, you might want to ask your sports dietitian or your athletic trainer to check your sweat rate to see how much water you really lose during practice. And then the very last thing for this presentation has to do with answering the question, is it possible to overdrink? Can I drink too much? And the answer is yes, right? There's something called exercise-associated hyponatremia. So hypo means low. Natremia refers to sodium. This is talking about low sodium levels in the body, all right? And this can occur with excessive consumption of water during long duration exercise. All right, it's often referred to again as exertional hyponatremia. We see this typically in newer athletes competing in their first long duration event. They tend to overdrink. They tend not to replace the sodium in the sweat that they lose with uh, fluid like a sports drink or with eating salty foods along the way. All right. So have to be very conscious of this. It can be actually be fatal. So some of the signs and symptoms, generally I just want to point out dizziness, lightheadedness, fatigue, those are the same signs as dehydration, but bloating and puffiness, all right? And that's due to over drinking of the fluids. This is far less common than underhydration, but we do tell athletes about this so that they don't force themselves to overdrink. And one thing I always, going back to this slide here, is that I always tell athletes that drink amount that you're comfortable with. If you feel fluids sloshing around in your stomach, you've probably had too much to drink. All right, so that ends this section. So I think you guys got some really good practical tips here. And when I see you again, we're going to be talking about, I think, nutrition for lowering inflammation and healing and immunity.